Oh, well, first, Jamie, thanks for putting this together, and Maxwell for hosting it. I want to thank Ms. Norton, Ms. Presley, Ms. Tlaib, and Ms. Stansberry for being here. I really appreciate it, and thank you to the panelists. So I remember being in the Florida legislature when Pulse happened. And myself, I was a state rep. Darren Soto was a state senator. He's in Congress now also. I remember we tried to pull a maneuver to get our colleagues to come back into the legislative session because we were out of session. And it triggered a vote. Members had a vote just to come into the session to discuss the issue. No proposal, just agree to meet. And every single Republican voted not to even go meet. And then a year and a half later, I had the shooting at my high school at Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And I remember exactly where I was when that happened. And I remember finding out later on in that day that my 4-year-old was in a closet around the corner from Marjory Stoneman Douglas at his preschool. And the teacher that was in the closet with him, her daughter was killed while she was protecting my son in the closet. And that turned out to be Jen Guttenberg, Fred Guttenberg's wife. And the principal from Columbine, I remember exactly what you remember. I attended 7 funerals. I was driving past funerals to go to funerals. I couldn't go to all the funerals. They were all scheduled at the same time. And the impact that that had on the community, makeshift memorials at the park that was taken over. We had to ban fireworks in Parkland because it was triggering the kids in 4th of July. And I remember all of that like it was yesterday, and this February will be 7 years. And I remember telling my wife, you know, I'm just so happy my kids are young and I don't have to explain it to them. Well, my 4-year-old's now 10. And about 3 weeks ago, he asked me about the shooting that happened at Marjory Stoneman Douglas because they took the building down finally. And I was proud to bring Vice President Kamala Harris to the building, to go through the building, to look at all the things, the lessons learned, school safety lessons that are learned, gun violence lessons that are learned, training, the difference what training does. How do you lock a door? I mean, simple things that failed, unfortunately, that day. SROs not going into the buildings, all sorts of stuff. But that building just came down, and the mental impact that had on the community when the building came down. Maxwell talked about the bill that we passed. I remember the first instinct I had when I got home when I got to Parkland. I flew home. We were in Tallahassee. I flew home, and I got a tour of the school, and I remember thinking to myself, everyone's going to watch this on TV. They're not going to see it. So I had a weird feeling. I was like, let me call the Speaker of the House. We're friends. Let me see if he'll come down here. And so the Republican and the Speaker of the House came down, and he saw the school, and we literally went to dinner and started drafting the bill on a napkin that night. And it was, we agreed that there were things that we weren't going to agree on. I asked for an assault weapons ban. He was like, that's not going to happen. And I said, okay, well, that's your boundary. Here are my boundaries. And we eventually settled on 3-day waiting periods, red flag laws, and raising the age to 21 because our gunman was 18. And anyways, that passed. We'll skip. That passed. But in the last 6 years, red flag laws in Florida have been used 19,000 times in 6 years. So 19,000 times law enforcement has deemed someone a danger to themselves, a danger to others. Suicide, domestic violence, mass shooters. In my county, since school started, 4 kids have been arrested for making threats online to shoot up a school in 45 days. And that's where real crime comes in, you know, monitoring kids, what they're saying on Facebook or what they're saying on Instagram. You know, some of these kids think it's funny. By the way, this wasn't all public schools. It was private schools also. A lot of parents think this isn't my problem. Private schools don't have this problem. It's coming there too, by the way. It just hasn't happened yet. So Florida was like lightning in a bottle, and I worked with the kids from March for Our Lives and the parents who crisscrossed the country who came up there. And yeah, we got lightning in a bottle. We got a completely Republican legislature and a completely Republican Senate and a completely Republican governor who then became a U.S. Senator to do gun violence prevention. And we beat Marion Hammer, the strongest NRA lobbyist at the time. Everyone was an A+ rated member of the NRA, and Maxwell's right. All these people got reelected. Not just reelected, they got promoted. Governor became a U.S. Senator. That speaker who wrote the bill with me on a napkin became the Secretary of Education who put the Safer Schools office, the first Safer Schools office in Florida, in the Department of Education. He now runs a college. The appropriations chair who got me the $25 million to build a new building in Parkland, because I knew the kids were never going back into the old building, he became an ambassador in the Trump administration. And so this idea that it cannot happen, I saw it happen. I was part of it. I was there. And I always give the Republicans credit in my state for doing the right thing. Now, something weird happens when you come to D.C., because the senator who was governor at the time, who signed that bill, who still says he supports the bill in the state, but says it's a state's issue. He doesn't want to do anything up here. So there's something weird in the water up here on why we can't seem to get it done. State legislatures are doing more than we are. Mr. Brown, I wanted to ask a question because I thought your testimony was compelling. One of the things that I have wondered, because you're now kind of the second generation of March for Our Lives kids coming, or third generation, right? Yeah, second generation, because you were in high school when Parkland happened, right? Right. What do you say to the kids that are like coming up now, who 6 years after Parkland or 6 years after March for Our Lives, who are like, but nothing has happened. Like, we can't get anything to happen. How do you keep yourself motivated, or how do you keep kids motivated for staying involved or keeping the mood when they feel they're not seeing progress?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's a tough question, because comparatively, when I look at my real life, it's going to be hard for me to say nothing has happened for these kids who think that nothing has happened. I mean, there are so many policy wins as it pertains to gun violence prevention at a national level. So many policy wins as it pertains to gun violence, even at a local level, in terms of solving some of these issues that we're discussing, like mass shootings. And I'm saying there's been a ton because I'm a Black American whose problems don't get solved in this country. So when I look at what March for Our Lives has been able to accomplish in 4 years or 5 years, I know organizations that have been working for 150 years and can't do half of what March and so many other beautiful people have put their money, their time, their energy, American people, and politicians, all of which have put their resources together to make things happen. So are all the things we want to happen happening? No. That's why we're here. But certainly, I've sat with so many families, Uvalde survivors or Columbine survivors, and who have said thank you to March and so many Congress members for what they have done. And so that's why I emphasize that I'm happy about us having a policy conversation. Like that's what you guys are here for, and that's what we're here for. But also, beyond it, I think what's going to make sort of close that gap is making sure that, like you said, that's something in the water. Whatever is in the water, I didn't vote for y'all to let something in the water stop you from making the right choices. So something in the water is not a state or a national problem, it's a personal problem. And that's what I emphasized earlier when I said we have to update our hearts and our minds as individuals, because a lot of what we're waiting on when I talk to the young people, it's like they told me today, they don't think they can do anything. They think the problems are bigger than them. But in my hood, that makes sense, because they've literally not gotten anything done in terms of policy. So I want to see y'all in my school building and in all the school buildings around D.C. showing these kids what it looks like to make policy change, period. If you do not do that, these things will not change in my community.
No, thank you. And my second question is for anyone on the panel, but you could take it too, Mr. Brown. One of the things that I realized after Parkland or during Parkland while I was going through it is I started getting parents reaching out to me about, their kid was killed, or, my kid was playing basketball and a stray bullet just killed them while they were playing basketball, or they were driving on the highway and a stray bullet killed my kid. And I realized that, when Parkland happened 6 years ago, we had 17 people that were killed, but there were 200 people that had been killed by random acts of gun violence in Miami-Dade County within the last 10 years, right? And those stories are only even on the local news, barely, if you're lucky. And so one of the things, and I think March for Our Lives has done a great job with this, is that, yes, these mass shootings are horrific, school shootings are horrific, but we also have to talk about the daily gun violence, because if you look at the totality of the numbers, if it's a numbers game, the daily gun violence way outweighs the mass shootings. Now, it's not one or the other. It's all bad. But when I talk to young people, that's something that they bring up as well, which is it's all. We have to do both. Anyone can address that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just say,
Please.
we heard how the ranking member started by, talking about how exactly like you're saying, the mass shootings are less than, 2% of the public health problem that we're facing. And every day in cities like Baltimore, right, there are young black men that are being slaughtered on our streets. And for a long time, no one talked about those stories, right? It's not until recently where we've started to kind of shift the focus. And if we want to be honest, right, it wasn't until like suburban white schools started getting shot up that people started paying attention. Just last week, we had 8 people that were killed, just a few blocks from the hospital, right, from a mass shooting. This is constantly continuing to happen. So I think the focus that you're talking about is critical. And what I would say is that when you think about what is happening in America right now, people are desensitized, okay? Think about who's exposed to the carnage, right, in general. It's the kids that have to witness these horrific shootings and are lucky enough to survive. It's the parents that have to identify their kids, some of which are unidentifiable, as we saw in Uvalde. And it's the first responders, the medical examiners, the trauma surgeons, right? The people that are there on the front lines taking care. But everyone else, they're not witness to the type of carnage that these bullets are causing. And I think that's caused an incredible disconnect. And I hear it all the time. People say, oh, another shooting. It's not a shooting, it's a massacre. And I think that disconnect is terribly problematic.
Thank you, Dr. Sokrin. Thank you, Congressman Moskowitz.